Hey, how's it going? It's Lee Halliday, and in this video we are going to be building a custom hook based off of this library here called Use Local Storage State that I saw this week and looked pretty cool, and I wanted to try to recreate it and basically teach what I learned in the process. So what does it do? It allows you to use it like the use state hook, but it does a couple things. A, it stores that state into local storage so that you can refresh the page and you still have the same value. But B, it allows you to sync that state across multiple browser tabs or windows. For example, here I can type into this box and you can see it showing up on the right. Or I can pop the dark and light mode back and forth and you can see that it reflects in both windows. I can refresh the page and I still have all of my state. So that's what we're going to be building today. So I'll just make this full screen, go into my app, and I'm going to copy over basically the starting point. So undo all of that work. That's a little tip, basically how I build these videos. I build the whole thing from scratch, I get it working, and then I delete it and restart. So it's still like all fresh in my head, and I do no editing at all. I just sort of give her and see what happens. Okay, so we're back to a blank page that says app. It's a Create React app. I've got nothing else installed except this React Helmet async, which we'll use when we're building the dark and light mode theming. But let's get started. So we're going to be building a custom hook, and it is called Use Local Storage State. So why don't we call that, same thing, Use Local, we'll call it Use Local State and make it a little bit shorter. So it's a function, and there we are. So what does this function receive? It's going to receive a couple things. One will be the key, and the other thing will be the default value. So let me show you how we're going to be using this hook. So we're going to say use local state, and we'll be passing in a key. So we'll pass in the username, and its initial value will be an empty string. And we'll also be using another one for the theme, so use local state, and we'll call this the theme, and we'll start off with a default of light mode. Okay, so what does this function return us back? It will return us the username, and then a function called setUsername to change that. And this one will return us the theme and the setTheme function. Cool. So it doesn't work yet, but no, it doesn't even work yet at all. So let's try to fix that. So we're expecting to receive an array back that has two values. One is the actual value of the thing, and the other is a function we can call to change that. So let's return, and we want to return two things, right? So we could one and then a function. So it doesn't do anything yet, but now our page actually works. So let's undo that and get it using actual values. So we're inside of our custom hook, we're going to use the hook that comes with React, use state. So we'll import that and we'll get our value here and our setter function set value, and that will be equal to use state. And so what will the default value be? For now, let's just paste that value in here, and I'll show you how we're going to change that shortly. So now when we're returning, we could return value and we could return set value. And it should be working now. Yep. And we could even go so far as, why don't we get it up and running with an input? So input with a value of username. And when it changes, it will call a function. And what will this function do? It will receive the event, and it will call setUsername passing e.target.value, just like that. So now I can come in here and I can type, and it's being stored in state, but when I refresh, it's gone because I haven't done anything yet with local storage. So really I've done nothing yet, right? My custom hook basically just is the same as a use state, but it's a lot more convoluted, so it's completely pointless right now. But why don't we start to rig it up so that it will save that value inside of local storage. So the first thing I'm going to change is the default value when I pass it into useState. So you can actually pass a function in here. And that function will be called when it's looking for a default value for this useState hook. And I didn't know that. I sort of discovered that while I was looking through the code of that library that I will link to below. So what we can do here is we can first try to load this key from local storage. And if it exists, we'll use it. If not, we'll use this local, this default value here. So what we can do is we can first try to load the value from local storage. So const stored value, and we'll say that it's local storage.getItem using the key, like that. And what we'll do then is we will return. So if stored value is null, we'll assume then that's basically the value you get when you try to access a key for an item that doesn't exist. We could see that in our console here if we just pop this in, ignore all the errors for now, and say local storage.getItem. No way. See, it returns null. So that's what we're looking for. So if it is null, what we can assume is that it doesn't yet exist. So we are going to pass that as the true side of it. And if it's not equal to null, then we can basically assume that local storage has something in it. So we can say stored value. But there's a trick here. Whenever you store or retrieve items from local storage, when you're putting it into local storage, you need to stringify it. And when you're taking it out of local storage, you need to JSON parse it. So what we want to do is say JSON.parse here, because you have to store basically a JSON string version in local storage. So now we've got our initial value, loading it either from local storage or using this default value that we're passing into our custom hook. So it should still work. Oh, and it's actually using the value Lee because I think I had that inside of my local storage from before. So let me just remove item username. There we go. So now it's back to nothing and it's not saving it. But that did prove that it's working, so that's cool. Okay. The second thing we want to do is basically override this function here that ends up being either set username or set theme. And we're going to override it to basically intercept what the value it's receiving and write that to local storage prior to calling the set value function to update it inside of React state. So that basically every time it's changing the state, it's also going to be writing that value to local storage. So let's create a function to do this. So we sort of keep this return value clean, and we will call the function set value in local storage. Okay, that's a horribly long function name, but it's descriptive, right? So that's what we're going to be returning instead. It will be a function here. And it's going to get slightly complicated. And the reason is when you call this set username or set theme, there's basically two ways you can call that function, the setter function. You can just straight up pass a value in, but you can also pass a function that's called, and we'll show sort of what that looks like. But we need to handle both use cases so that our function signature resembles the same signature as what useState would give us. So what we're going to be getting is the new value here, either way. But then what we need to figure out is that new value just a value, or is it a function that needs to be called? Either way, what we're going to be doing is use this function here, and this will be using in the way that it does receive a function. So there's lots of functions going on. So this function that we're passing to React set value, that receives the current value that is stored inside of this state property. And then our goal is basically to return the new value from this function. But how we get to that new value depends whether this new value being passed in is a function or just a straight up value. So let's create a variable called the result, and it will be equal to, let's check if new value is a function. So type of new value equals function. So if that's the case, what we'll do is we will call it passing in the current value, because that's sort of the expected functionality. False otherwise, meaning we already have a value, we don't have to call anything, so we'll just pass back this new value. So now that we have result here, what we can do is, let's just return it for now. And let's add a console.log to see what we're dealing with here. Okay. So we come back here, and as I type in, it's got a bit of double rendering going on from the looks of it, but it's console.logging out every value that it receives. So basically we need to just take this and put it into local storage now. So what we can do is say local storage dot set item. We can use our key here. And remember, we can't just pass in result. We have to pass in the JSON.stringified version of the result. So that if it's an array, it's an object, it's even a string or null or anything, it will convert that into the string form of that JSON so that it can save it in local storage. And remember, we've already handled when the page loads to parse that JSON value back into a JavaScript object. Okay. So now if we refresh, we type in my name, and if I were to refresh the page, you can see that it's storing it in local storage. We could access it here, .getItem, username, and we can see here it's stored the stringified version of that in local storage. Okay, so if I were to open up a new tab now, visit the same site, pop it out into a new window so I can see them side by side, and start typing, you can see that it's not synchronizing back and forth, and that's what we're going to be tackling next. So right between these here, there's a way or an event you can listen to called the storage event that's called every time storage is updated in the same page, the same sort of host URL, but in a different tab or window. So that if it's changing local storage in this tab or window, I can listen to the event in this side, or if it's happening here, I can listen to the event over on the right side. So we're going to trigger this by listening for an effect. And it's really only something, we're setting up an event listener, so we only have to have it run the first time. But we will say use effect. So use effect receives a function and the keys to watch for when to run this effect function. So we are going to look for the key. Basically, it's just going to run once per use of our hook. And what are we going to put in here? So the first thing we're going to do is create a listener function. So we'll fill it in a second. But this listener function is going to be on window.addEventListener. We're going to be listening to the storage event, and we'll pass it this listener function. And I'll show you why in a second, why I chose to put it into a variable rather than just doing it inline here. Okay, so we received the event item, and we want to check because the storage could be updating a different key or something we don't really care about. So we'll basically put an if statement in. So if e dot, what's it called? Storage area is equal to local storage. So we want to make sure that it's not session storage, it's actually local storage, because you could have local and session storage with the same key. And we can also check that the key on this event is equal to the key that we've received in our custom function. So if that's true, what we can do is update our state. And we don't need to put it into local storage. It's already in local storage. It was just put into local storage from a different tab or window. So all we need to do is update our state using set value. So set value, we do need to json.parse it because it's coming from local storage, so that it's coming as a JSON string. And this comes in event.new value, just like that. Why don't we log out the event just so we can take a look at what it looks like. So if I load this here, and why don't I change this window on the right? So L, you can see here that it's, and I don't know why it's rendering twice. That would be good to know. But you can see here we have the storage event, and we have the key that's changing the old value and the new value. And there's a lot of other things. For example, we also used the storage area, which is local storage, not session storage. And I actually had a couple things in here. I had my theme that I was playing with earlier. Okay. Oh, I know why it's happening twice. It's happening because I've used this hook twice. And the event is being run twice, but the if statement will only basically match when the key matches. So if I took this console.log and put it in the if statement, it should only happen once. Great. Okay, I don't have a weird double render error, which I'm glad about. Okay, one thing you should always do when you're adding event listeners is you should clean them up, meaning when the React component is unmounting, you want to remove that event listener. So the unmount event is it's also referred to as the cleanup event when you're dealing with hooks. It's called whenever basically this key value is no longer valid. It's an old value or the component's unmounting. So what you can actually do is return a function here that's called once on cleanup. Basically when this effect is no longer valid. And what we want to do in here is say window.remove event listener. And you have to tell it which event you're listening to, and then you have to pass in the listener function to stop listening to. So that's why I put it into its own variable, so that we can remove that event listener when the cleanup function occurs. So now we've got an input saving the value to state, but also saving that value to local storage, so that when I refresh the page, we still have the same value, but it's also synchronizing between multiple tabs and windows now. So the last thing I want to do is hook up this theme to allow for dark and light modes. So what I'm going to do is, I've already imported React Helmet Async, and I'll show you why we need this in a second. And it's because I'm going to be saving a data property on the body tag. So why would I do that? I've written some CSS where I'm using CSS variables, and I'm basically setting up a whole bunch of color variables, which are the default ones for light mode. But when the body has a data attribute of theme with dark, it basically swaps all these values over to dark mode colors. So then down in my CSS, I'm not really doing too much here. I'm basically setting the body background and color. I'm not setting it to actual colors, but I'm setting it to these variables that will either be in light mode or dark mode. But how do I add a data theme attribute to the body when I'm inside of my React component here and I don't even have access to the body? That's what I'm using React Helmet Async for. So React Helmet allows you to basically set things that live in your HTML tag, your body tag, your headers. So for example, like the OG meta tags and all of that stuff, you can set those with Helmet, and React Helmet gives you a whole bunch of errors right now because it's written in the old like class style of React, but React Helmet Async from the New York Times fixes that issue. So what we need to first do is have our helmet provider, and then inside of inside of the provider, what we can do is use the helmet component to change properties of the body or meta tags in the head, etc. So we're going to go in here is change the body, and we can set the data theme attribute, and it will be equal to this theme value in our state, just like that. So because I have the value dark already in my state, you can see that instantly I'm in dark mode now. I just don't have a way to toggle back and forth. I'm going to just on the screen put an H1 with the theme so that we can easily see that. So we're in dark. So let's add a button to be able to toggle that back and forth. I'm actually going to put this above the H1. Okay. So I set up a class in my CSS to position it in the sort of top right, and that class is toggle theme. So we'll give it that. And for now, we'll just put the word of whatever theme it is, but we need to add an on-click event. So this is a function that's called when the event occurs. And remember I mentioned there's basically two ways to call these set state functions. You can just pass in a new value, or you can pass in a function that receives the current value, and then you can produce a new value based on the current one. Why don't we try out that form just to see both? So we'll call set theme. We'll pass in a function that will receive the current value, and its job is to basically return the new value. So what we'll do is we'll say, if the current value is light, that means we want to switch it over to dark. Otherwise, that means it's dark, so we want to switch it to light. So if I come back here, the button's not great. Can't see the actual text on it. And that's probably because something about my color's not right. Color on primary, button background. Whatever, we'll fix that in a second. But it does work, you can click it back and forth, right? So what I actually wanted to do in here is put an image in. So an IMG, a source. We'll put an alt, so toggle the theme. And I've got two images to switch back and forth to, the torch light and the torch dark. So what we want to do is we want to say if the theme is light, that means we want to show the dark torch. Basically show the next state, what you would transition into. Otherwise we'll show the light torch. What did I do wrong? Dark torch is not defined. Oh, torch light, torch dark. Okay. Torch dark. Okay. So now I get that sweet little flashlight up in the top. So if I switch this, I'm in dark mode. Click it again, I am into light mode. Cool. And it's all synchronizing back and forth. I can change this state and it's updating in both. I can refresh the page on both of them and I still get the same values. So everything was accomplished. Just to go over it quickly again, I was setting out to replicate this use local storage state hook that I saw in the React Status newsletter last week. And its basically purpose is to return things in the same format that you're used to with use state, except it will be saving that value every time it changes inside of local storage under this key. And it will synchronize state between tabs. So how I accomplished that, I came up, create a function that receives the key and the default value. I did use the use state hook to basically store my state in React state, and its default value came from either what was currently in local storage or the default value that was passed in. So what I did is I returned the current value of state plus a function that can be called to change that value. And that function, we created it so that it can receive either a value that the new value should be or a function that will be called with the current value and its job is basically to return the new one. So we handled that by checking if it were a function or not. First thing we did, we put it in local storage prior to returning the value, so that would get put inside of our React state. And just remember, whenever you're writing to local storage, you need to stringify. And whenever you're reading from local storage, like up here, you need to parse that value out. Last thing we did was we added a useEffect hook to basically, it only happens once per key that we're watching, but it will set up a listener to listen for changes in local storage or session storage. And we ensured that the event that was occurring was in the right storage area and for the right key that we're worried about. And if that were the case, we parse out that value and put it into our React state. So with that in place, we were able to basically complete our app. We used React Helmet Async to modify a data theme attribute on the body and a button to toggle that back and forth between light and dark theme. And then down here, we had our input with our value coming from state and on change updating that value in state. That's it for today. We built our own custom hook using a number of different concepts and techniques, and introduced probably a couple new ideas around this storage event, and also how both for initial values and when you're calling that setter function, they can both be called with either just a straight up value or a function, basically a callback that will receive our current value in state so that we can make a change based off that value. Hope you're all doing well, staying safe and healthy. Take care. Bye.